Every once in a while, a piece of media comes along that really leaves a lasting impression on me. Today, I'd like to discuss and review Legend of Vox Machina Season 2, Critical Role's animated series, which was adapted from their streamed D&D game, specifically Campaign 1. Now, before we begin, I just need to make one thing clear. I'm a longtime Critical Role fan, basically since day one. I'm intimately familiar and invested in the Critical Role universe, so in many ways, this show was made for me, and this review is a little biased. I mean, literally though, it was made for me. When you remember that this show came into being through a massive Kickstarter campaign from the community, yeah, in many ways, this animated show is a passion project that was made for the fans, paid for, in many ways, by the fans. So yeah, I might be a little biased. All that being said though, it comes as no surprise when I say that I absolutely love and adore this show. I love it a lot. Like, a lot. It's not perfect, which we're gonna get into later, but by the end of this video, I hope I can convince you, if you haven't watched this show already, to at least give it a chance. And if you have watched this show, I hope that maybe I can enlighten you on some of the absolutely amazing, beautiful things about it that I really like. So as we said, Legend of Vox Machina is an animated series based off of a Dungeons & Dragons campaign of all things, with the mini arcs in the campaign lasting hundreds of hours, being condensed down to a couple, 12 specifically, 23-minute episodes for the animated series. The story follows Vox Machina, a ragtag group of adventurers and friends who continuously rise up and face the call to defend those in need. In many broad, kind of philosophical ways, this is really what the entire story of Legend of Vox Machina, and just Vox Machina in general, is about. Accepting a call to action, taking your fate into your own hands. Once again, we have our familiar kooky cast of characters that we had in Season 1. Vex and Vax, the half-elf twins. Vax, the cunning rogue. Vex, the subtle ranger. Pike, the not-so-holy gnome cleric. Scanlan, the hedonistic sex-charged little bard gnome. Grog, the muscle-out, hulked barbarian, who is not the sharpest tool in the shed, but he does have a big heart. Percy, a nobleman, inventor, and sometimes massively stuck-up prick. And finally, Keyleth, a half-elf druid. While being crazy powerful, Keyleth struggles with self-confidence and self-belief, continuing to cause her to question her actions throughout Season 2. Season 2 depicts the story of the Chroma Conclave arc in the D&D campaign, a group of ancient chromatic dragons that have come to the continent of Taldore to conquer and subjugate the people there. In the first episode, we see these dragons launch a surprise attack on the city of Iman, resulting in absolute carnage and insane scenes of animation. The series follows Vox Machina in their fight to retake their home and destroy these dragons, while simultaneously though, the show explores the personal trauma and the stories of Vox Machina themselves as people. And they do this in such an absolutely beautiful way. Before we go any deeper into the story, I want to talk about easily one of the best things about this show: the art. Legend of Vox Machina is animated by Titmouse, the studio who did Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I'm not joking when I say this, this show is, in every sense of the word, a work of art. It is easily one of the most beautiful aesthetic works of animation I have seen from an English studio, and it even hangs with some of the best Japanese anime animations that I've seen in a long time. It even puts a lot of these anime to shame with just how stunning some of these scenes are. There's an insane level of detail and love that's put into Legend of Vox Machina, put into many of these scenes. Much of it can really only be appreciated through slowing the animation down to where you really see the detail frame by frame. This level of detail not only makes for an amazing visual spectacle to witness, it also further makes the world feel alive, and it immerses the viewer. One of my favorite scenes that really depicts this concept well is when Vox Machina travel to the Feywild, another plane of existence in the Dungeons & Dragons world. The Feywild is described as being a place of awe-inspiring beauty, a place where ancient magic can take root. It's supposed to feel like another world, and the animators captured these scenes and this world so freaking brilliantly. It's impossible not to feel immersed, in my opinion. I mean, just look at the attention to detail in the lighting on some of these scenes. What other animated series do you know that does this? Do you know how much trouble they went to consistently show these angles of the lighting and how the shadows move when the characters move? To get this done accurately, I can't even imagine how long it took. It's some next level shit. It's all these things together that really make this show artistically and visually such a joy to watch. In my opinion, visually, this show is up there with some of the best animes to date, and just overall, one of the best visually aesthetic animated works probably ever made. It's insane to think how long a scene like this took to animate. The level of detail in each little frame is just incredible. You see, in many ways, Legend of Vox Machina is kind of filling a void that's left in the English-speaking animated space. As a whole, the animated space is very much dominated by anime, Japanese animation studios, and over the years, it feels like the English animation studios really have stopped catering to adults. And I don't mean animations like Family Guy, The Simpsons, or even Archer. None of these shows count. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm talking about a real story, a grand narrative piece that just so happens to be aimed at a more adult audience and just so happens to be animated. The only really comparable work off the top of my head I can think of over the last few years has been Netflix's Castlevania animated series. This brings me to the writing of Legend of Vox Machina, another thing which is absolutely amazing about this show. As we said from the start, Legend of Vox Machina is derived and adapted from Critical Role's first Dungeons & Dragons campaign. In broad strokes, the story follows the campaign relatively pretty accurately, moving from each significant story beat to the next with a bit of creative flourishing added throughout the middle. When you think about it, it really is quite impressive being able to somehow compress down hundreds of hours of D&D goodness in a D&D arc to 12, 23-minute episodes, but yet the episodes don't lose any charm or detail in the process. If anything, what is possibly more impressive about the writers is they somehow simultaneously depict the personal stories and trials and tribulations of the people that are Vox Machina, all of this done on the backdrop of the greater problem and the greater story of the Chroma Conclave. While our heroes search for allies and weapons to defeat these ancient dragons, each of them goes through their own unique character struggle, adding to their own character growth over the course of the season. And honestly, these personal stories and challenges are just so human and relatable that they really are one of the primary things that had me glued to the show. The writing is surprisingly deep and philosophical. It's funny because Legend of Vox Machina in many ways kind of baits the audience. On first viewing, many would probably think Legend of Vox Machina is some fun adult animated adventure comedy with intense battle scenes and regular use of slapstick childlike toilet humor. However, somehow it both doesn't take itself too seriously as like a work of art and a work of fiction, but at the same time, it's capable of telling these really deep, raw, emotional stories, real human, personal stories. One of the main through lines throughout Legend of Vox Machina is the hero's call to action and the different ways the characters deal with this call to serve. As we said earlier, each character in many ways goes through their own personal story arc and kind of a character development throughout the season. Many of these stories are really quite real and emotional, and they have the ability to hit deep to the core of us as humans and as peoples. I mean, I'm really not ashamed to say this, but this show had me cry at least maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the second seasons with some of these emotional moments and just how real a lot of the story and the characters feel at times. Personally, one of my favorite stories over this show is the story of Vax and how he must come to terms with a bargain he's made and come to terms with his fears of death and his fears of loss, all to achieve a greater purpose, a greater calling. Ultimately, his story climaxing with this idea of death, and that death is not something that we as humans should be afraid of, because death merely existing gives meaning to life. Or perhaps the story of Keyleth, a young woman who suffers with massive self-belief problems and self-confidence issues as she struggles to live up to the expectations that were set for her by her parents and by her as a person. Throughout this season, Keyleth is thrust into action as she must learn to trust and believe in herself and her powers, culminating in one of my favorite episodes, Pass Through Fire. As well, the writers throughout the season blend these scenes, these flashback scenes, throughout the narrative. These scenes give the characters more depth. As well, it helps to flesh out and reveal plot information and show the growth and development of these characters over time. The D&D campaign didn't do this, largely because they kind of couldn't. It really wouldn't make sense to be constantly doing weird flashbacks in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. But in the animated show, it just works so freaking well, and some of these flashbacks were actually some of my favorite scenes throughout the entire season. I don't really want to spoil or go into too much detail or minutia of the story because we don't want to spoil anything, but I have to say, the writing itself through all of this is absolutely top notch. And if you want to see me go into further detail on the many aspects of the writing and the philosophical nature of it, don't forget to check out some of our other mini Legend of Vox Machina content episode breakdowns. Okay, so the thing is, if you are any type of Critical Role fan or even a D&D fan, you're probably going to enjoy the show. Obviously, it's much easier to buy into the animated series when you are intimately familiar with the world, the characters, and the story itself. It's like if you've read a book before you go and watch the movie adaptation of the book. In many ways, that movie was aimed at you. You are supposed to be the primary audience. However, though, you don't need to be a Critical Role fan to enjoy or even understand the show. While at times maybe some of the names or references might go over your head, Legend of Vox Machina, in my opinion, does a really good job of introducing the whole world, the Critical Role universe, and the characters within it to a newer audience. While having knowledge of D&D and Critical Role, in my opinion, only further enhances the enjoyment that can be taken from this show, you definitely can still enjoy it, and it still is an amazing piece of media and art without any prior knowledge at all. I would, though, highly recommend to at least watch Season 1 before you watch Season 2, or you could be a tiny bit lost. You see, this is really one of the biggest worries I had when this show was first released. Would it be able to translate the amazing world of the Critical Role universe into a broader audience? See, Legend of Vox Machina, in my opinion, is not just a good Critical Role animated series. It's a good animated series, full stop. Now, that's not to say that I didn't have some issues with the show throughout my time watching it. Personally, I think probably the primary sticking point for me, and maybe for many other people, is the show's humor. As we said earlier, Legend of Vox Machina largely uses kind of crude slapstick humor. Expect many sex jokes throughout the show. Really though, my issue wasn't with the humor itself, more the timing of the humor. Legend of Vox Machina loves to have characters, specifically Scanlan and Grog, crack jokes during dramatic moments. Now I understand why they do this, because in many ways this is just being accurate to the Dungeons & Dragons campaign. This type of humor was super popular at the table during Campaign 1, just really throughout Critical Role in general, and people would love to crack jokes during dramatic moments or epic battles because, well, D&D. It's just kind of what tends to happen when you gather a group of friends around a table in person to play a role-playing game. Sometimes in the show, though, this humor doesn't really land. Most of the time it does, but sometimes it doesn't, and it just feels, I don't know, a bit awkward. Much of the humor is actually funny. The show will make you laugh, but every once in a while, I would find myself kind of taken out of the moment by the timing of a joke. And sometimes it really does feel like the joke itself took away from the epic, crazy moment that was happening on our screens. This type of humor isn't for everyone, and for some people, it really is enough to not enjoy the show, while at the same time, though, some people absolutely love it, and it is the main reason why they do enjoy the show, either of which it's completely fair. You see, I was always going to enjoy and like this show because I'm a Critical Role fan. In fact, I've yet to speak to any other Critical Role fan that has had any real major problems or complaints with Legend of Vox Machina. In many ways, that's kind of mission accomplished for these guys. But the thing is, though, in many ways, I believe that these people that made Legend of Vox Machina really went above and beyond in creating this show. As a whole, it's just a brilliant work of media, period. Artistically, it's absolutely stunning. I think it belongs up there visually with some of the best animated works of all time. The attention to detail is absolutely insane, which makes for an even more immersive and breathtaking experience. I wanted to get some non-biased opinions for this review, so I made a few of my friends who knew nothing about the show watch a few of the episodes, and consistently all of them talked about how absolutely amazing the art and the animation was. You see, to me though, this show as an entire package is just amazing. It somehow blurs the lines between adventure comedy and a real dark personal drama. The writing is absolutely fantastic. The way the showrunners were able to compress a D&D campaign, a D&D story that took hundreds of hours into something way more digestible, but while not losing any luster or detail or charm that the original story had. It's just freaking amazing, man. The stories are deep and emotional. While the characters exist in a crazy fantasy universe, they still feel like real people. I think that my favorite thing about Legend of Vox Machina might be the writing and how it tells these really raw, real, emotional, human stories that are insanely relatable. All on the backdrop of some absolutely insane, absurd fantasy world. It's just good stuff, man. Legend of Vox Machina Season 2 is fantastic. It somehow gets better with each episode and is even better than Season 1. Hell, it might even be better than the actual arc from the campaign that it's based off of. I might get some flack for that opinion, but I really did feel that way coming out of this show. It's so much more than just an animated series. It's special in the story it tells and how it goes about telling it, and the emotion that it can elicit on the way. On its surface, it's just an animated series of a popular D&D show, but when you really start to peel back the layers and you start looking at this show for what it is, you start to realize that it really is so much more. You can really feel the love that was put into making this show. To me, for an animated work to be good, it needs a few things. Breathtaking art, captivating characters, insane action, fabulous writing. It's rare to find an animated work, especially one made by Americans or just an English-speaking studio, that do even half of these things. Legend of Vox Machina, though, does all of this, and more importantly, I think that the show makes you feel something, which to me really is the most important thing that I take away from media. Over the years, I've noticed that certain media has this ability, this profound effect on me that leaves a real emotional impact. Media that flicks some switch inside of our heads that makes us feel some kind of way. Generally, I've found that some of the best works of media are ones that have come from unexpected surprises. Media that makes you feel something when you didn't think that it was going to. Whether it was anime like Cyberpunk Edge Runners or a movie like the Tollywood epic RRR. Legend of Vox you see is no different than these two other works. You think you know the experience that you're gonna get when you sit down to watch this show, but then it somehow blindsides you. Maybe some fun and silly adult entertainment. A crazy fantasy-filled adventure with magic and dragons and crazy violent fight scenes, and some amazing art along the way. But through all of this, you start to realize that it's so much more than that. So much more than just an animated adaptation of a previous story of a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. I mean, it's absolutely insane just how much storytelling they managed to fit into, 25-minute episodes. It really shouldn't be possible when you think about it, but the writers absolutely nailed it. This show is amazing. It's one of the best animated works to come out of an American studio in a long time, and it gives me hope for the future of English-speaking animated content. Let me know in the comments down below, have you seen Legend of Vox Machina? What did you think of it? If you've made it this far in the video and you haven't seen Legend of Vox Machina, I really hope that you will consider watching it, because I promise you, this show is so much more than just a D&D cartoon. It's an amazing piece of media, from its art to its writing and its music, from top to bottom, just amazing. And I can't wait to see what the future holds for Titmouse and Legend of Vox Machina. As always, if you enjoyed the video or learned something new, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. I probably give this show like a 9.95 out of 10. It's definitely going to go on my list of one of the best things to come out in 2023 when the year is all said and done. As always, guys, I hope to see you in the next one. Stay safe out there, and until next time, peace, love, Adu.
love story that might be. We wasn't supposed to happen, so much talk around us. We became numb to the yapping. It was like 05, got my license to drive. Picked you up in my pop's car, went for a ride. Couldn't no one tell us nothing, that night was ours. All the stars aligned and you were so damn fine, yeah. It was young love, young heart.